All right, welcome everybody to today's session. Today we're going to talk about building your AI roadmap for 2026. So we're going to get into a couple different things. Some people might be in a couple different, paths or journeys at different points. That's fine. We'll kind of give a couple different scenarios or a couple different ways that that I see in the world that people are at different, you know, uh, parts of their journey. So let's get into it. We're going to talk about different priorities, governance, and how to execute on this stuff. That's me. So I'm Mike Lutenberger. I'm a field CTO here at Netrix, and I cover all things AI, and I'm AI agnostic. So whether that is Copilot, whether that is Anthropic's Claude, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, uh, I help customers kind of on the journey figuring out which one makes sense. Again, they're all different. They all have their strengths and their weaknesses. Um, and finding the right one, right, for the right tool. And that's important. I think that's an important aspect of this is a lot of people just think that, it's just all AI are kind of the same. And you'll see a lot of times where they'll just go get a model and kind of, as I like to say, think of it as a square peg, and they're just trying to mashing it, through a circle, right? Because a hole, because they're trying to make this model do or the things they want. Again, they all have general purposes, but some of them are better than others at other things. So it's important to find the right model for you. So I say this often. Again, if you've ever been in a meeting with me, AI isn't your strategy. It's the tool to execute that strategy. Again, what is your strategy? Is it to, you know, make more people more efficient in their day to day, right? Cut down on time that it takes to do mundane tasks or things like that to make them basically, the equivalent of doing 10, 12 hours a day, in an 8-hour day with AI. Then that's your, AI just helps you get to that. That's it. It's not your strategy. That's the part of it. And kind of how I like in this too, or like, kind of a parallel to that is, if you think of like a builder of a house, like they're not thinking, they're not building their entire business or whatnot around the hammer, right? The hammer is a tool, AI is a tool. That tool can get switched out, right? Maybe one day we, stop doing hammers and we're going to do power tools, right? And the reason we want to do power tools is we want our employees to be more efficient, right? So again, very similar kind of concept there that, maybe today you're using a hammer, but you want them more efficiently, right? So you're going to be looking at a different piece of that to execute that strategy, and maybe that is getting tools that can, you know, um, do more work, right, in the same amount of time. So think of it that way. These are kind of the four, what I would say is kind of the baseline, right? That I feel like you have to have either in consideration. Again, I'm not saying that all of these have to be set on day one necessarily to start dipping your toe into AI, but these are definitely before you, what I would consider kind of launching it, right, from a company, whole company perspective, is I would definitely go down this route, right? These are kind of the four pillars or baselines, whatever you want to look at, however you want to say that. Kind of talk about the technical guardrails, right? So I am, while I am a fan of having an environment with some mixed models, and what I mean by that is if you're in the Microsoft space, it just makes sense that at a base, all of your employees have Copilot. That just makes sense. However, Copilot can't do everything. And again, this isn't against Copilot. If we were in Gemini, Google Gemini, I would assume and I would recommend that all of your employees have Gemini as a base, but even Google Gemini is not going to do everything that you want for every department. So what I like to see is like if you have like a dev team, maybe it makes sense to do like Anthropic, doing some of the coding with that because it's from a benchmark perspective, it's very good. So I'm a fan of having a mixed environment. Again, not everybody gets that Anthropic right license. It might be just the dev team, or maybe you give your marketing team a different one, right? Or legal, right? The kind of their own kind of piece of it. Again, everybody still has the base together, but then if there's a use case for, which we'll get to use cases, if there's a use case kind of around that, then yeah, we'll go in there and we'll make sure that we're getting that specialized LLM in there to do specialized thing, whether it's contracts reading or whatever it is, right? But figuring that out first is that. So with that, we want technical guardrails. And what I mean by that is if we do decide that we want Copilot and say Anthropic, then we're going to want to block the other ones, right? Because, and again, this all ties together because it's going to come in with our compliance and our policies and our training and our governance all around that stuff, right? So pick the models you decide on. I recommend blocking those other ones out so that you're not, doing anything around that. And then governance is also important on that. And there's kind of a couple different thoughts of governance, right? Of not only just securing the data itself, but making sure the right permissions are on that, which again, we'll talk to in a minute. It is important to think of that, not only the access to the data, but the data that's out there. And when I mean access is not just from a security perspective. Yes, you don't want everybody having, access to a location with every, social security numbers and stuff like that. That's, of course, we absolutely think that. But there's other things with extra access that I'll get into in a second. So think of that, as we like to say is, or as I like to say, is you always want to find the Goldilocks of governance, right? You don't want it too restrictive, because if it's too restrictive, they won't use it. They'll find something else to do. If it's too loose and it's very much like the Wild West, it's going to be a mess and it's going to be crazy. So you got to kind of have, strike that balance between I can use it, but in, a controlled manner that allows me to use it in a good way. Company AI policies. Again, this is something you absolutely want to go down, right, and do and get one created. Again, we can help with that. We have lots of customers we have helped in this journey. You want a policy that's flexible, because things are going to change, right, over time. And also, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And basically, this is kind of your, your contract with your employees, or your kind of, your code of ethics, your rules of engagement, if you will, of how to use AI. Because I promise you, if you don't tell them, don't do it this way, it will probably get used that way. So it's important to have policies around that of usage and whatnot. And again, bringing what models you're going to do, what kind of avenues you have for, testing these things out. And last but not least is probably the most important one, in my opinion, is the training. I can't tell you how many times we get, called into, a customer, where a customer will call us and say, hey, we've been running whatever, Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever it is, right? Whatever their flavor of LLM is. And they're like, I'm not sure we're really getting the use out of it, or we're not getting really what we're paying for. We think that there's more to it and we're missing something. So we've done audits, right, where we figure out what the usage is and find out it's generally a very small percentage of people. But there's always one thing, and I'm not saying that across the board that everybody who gets an LLM just doesn't use it. No, but the common thread is how that was deployed to the company is always the same. So we'll do this exercise, and we'll understand what the usage is and all of these things around that, and get some, KPIs, some data points to say, okay, well, here's how many users you have, here's what they're using it for and really using it at all. And it's generally, like a fourth, honestly, of what that number truly is. And then when we start, doing interviews with different departments and trying to figure out, like, why are you using this other LLM instead? And it's like, oh, because that LLM, like I honestly, one of the things I hear a lot is, well, we got ChatGPT because Copilot couldn't make PowerPoint presentations, which is like, it's literally been able to do that since day one. So there's definitely a disconnect of capabilities of what they do, the one that you've purchased and not, right? So, but the common theme that's always around that is, I always ask the next question of, how was Copilot or, Claude or whatever it is, ChatGPT, introduced to you as an organization? Like, how did you find out you had access to it? And it's always a common theme. It was emailed to me. We had an email campaign the day of that said, hey, it was like a Monday. Guess what? You got access to Copilot with a couple links. And that was it. I'm like, no formal training. Nope. No formal kind of, build up to it, if you will, almost a, a marketing campaign around it's coming. Nope, none of that stuff. So, like most organizations, a lot of people don't read their emails, right? So that just kind of fell through the cracks in a lot of places. So we see that time and time again. Again, that's a great recipe for it, is doing the training and the communications around that, kind of building that, a marketing kind of push towards it before you actually release it and get the users ready, all that fun stuff. We're going to dive more into this. So with that, with governance, there's kind of two, what I say, overlooked data problems. Again, like I talked about, previously, everybody's always thinking about that. We don't want executive salaries. Not that like anybody keeps executive salaries in a spreadsheet on a SharePoint site with everybody, but the idea of that, right? That we don't want someone to accidentally have access to this spreadsheet with salaries or something like that. And that's a no-brainer, right? Of course, and that should be, even if you weren't turning on AI, that should be how you're running it anyways. But the two things that I think of that often get overlooked, and you need to look at it now from an AI perspective because it's very different, is stale data and then access to everything. So let's kind of attack the first one first, is the stale data piece. So why is this important? So let's just use SharePoint, or you can, Google Sites, whatever the flavor you want, right, of where you're kind of keeping your documents today, let's say. Before AI, if I were to just go search for something, and let's say that we had, no one was using the versioning, so we just kind of made copies of documents and renamed it and changed a little bit and named it. And an example would be is like policy, right? Let's say that we have like a 2020 policy, and then when 2021 came around, we made a copy of it. We called it 2021. We tweaked a couple things because we did have some changes, and then we just kept doing that, right? So, but we have all these documents in there, these stale documents that are old now. Well, now what's going to happen is, again, pre-AI, if I were to just do a search, it might not be the first one because generally a lot of the searches will kind of look at popularity of the document. So if it's been kind of accessed a ton of times, then that will generally be the first one. Doesn't mean it's the most recent one, but you might have to go one or two down below, right? Well, with AI, there is no one or two down below, right? You want the answer. Well, the problem with stale data is, let's go back to that scenario, and I say, give me the policy on, let's say, travel. And let's say back in 2020, it was $500. And now in 2025, it's $200 for travel, just as this example. So now, maybe one day, AI brings me back 2021s, and then the next day or later that day, it's 2024s. And so I'm always getting different answers. But let's say that it really matters today because I'm actually going on a company trip and I need to know what I can book to. So I ask, let's just say, Copilot in this example, I'll say, hey, Copilot, what's the policy? What's the travel policy like budget we have, right? So maybe it's going to pull 2020s and it's going to tell me $500. Okay, cool. I'm good with that. So I go and I book my trip, and now next month comes around and I get back, I submit my expenses and it gets declined. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, that doesn't follow our policy. I'm like, but I asked Copilot. Copilot told me. So now you're going to run into that issue, right? Now I'm getting some things denied. You're going to have a perception problem from that user base that, well, it's not very, it's not reliable. I asked it about our policies and it couldn't even give me the right one. Again, it's not AI. It's not Copilot's fault. We had stale data in there. And so it's just as important to make sure that those, those salaries in a spreadsheet or, a site with social security numbers is locked down to just HR or whomever needs it. It's also important that just the stale data gets purged out of here because, again, you're going to run into all sorts of issues, like I said. The other side of this is the access to everything. So what I mean by that is, there's lots of times that site owners will look at the content that they have and say, well, there's nothing secret in here, right? There's no social security numbers, credit card numbers, right? No, nothing like that. So it's okay if everybody has access to it. Well, now, again, in the sense or in the day of AI, that is a problem because, most of these ones, again, talk about Copilot again for a second here. The whole point of, what Copilot makes Copilot great is it has access to what's called the Graph API. And what is the Graph API? It's all the things that I have access to. It's my email, it's my calendar, it's all of those things. But now if I've got access to thousands of documents that really don't even matter to my job or the things that I even do, well, that's going to make some of my asking of Copilot what I'll find very irrelevant, right? Like, why would it bring that? Like if there's some documents that are sitting in, say, finance, that there's no secret sauce in there, but they just gave access to everybody in the organization to it. Well, that's now part of everybody's kind of model, if you will, right? So now that becomes a problem for me because when I'm asking Copilot things, it's not necessarily relevant to my job because it's pulling things that, yes, I do have access to, but it has nothing to do with what I do day to day. So having access to everything is also a bad thing, right? When it comes to things like that, because again, most everybody, I would say, that is, getting into AI or wants to use AI wants that kind of personalization of it, right? That it knows my company data, it knows my emails, right? Because that's what's going to make it relevant. Otherwise, we're just doing searches. So these two components are what I see overlooked quite a bit. We always kind of focus on the security, which is absolutely important. Not saying we shouldn't. Security is absolute. We want to make sure that there's no overexposure of this data. But these two are just as important to have a very good, kind of rollout or usage of AI. Because that's is another thing I've heard from customers is they don't like it because it's very irrelevant to the data that's bringing back. And then we find out later that, well, they have all sorts of stale data, no kind of permission set on most anything. Everybody has access to everything. So keep that in mind. So let's talk about pilots for a second. 95% of pilots fail. So this was like a stat that was going around. It was an article, and it was sent to me from lots of people. Um, that was going around like LinkedIn and everything like that. So one thing I'll say about this is all right, as I would said to all of them who sent it to me was I said, but did you read the article? Right. And of course it was no, it was just a flashy headline. But really it boiled down to these kind of bullet points, right? That I kind of took away from that. But we also see with our own eyes is that there's no measurement of ROI. So how are we going to even invest? How long do we invest in here before we say, nah, it's not working out, right? If you don't kind of measure that, or you get use cases, again, the kind of the second bullet point of that, I've heard, and this is a true story from the field, right? Is I had a customer and we were talking, and it was an executive, and he said, we have, I think it was like 55 or 65 AI pilots going on right now. I was like, wow, what are they? And he's like, I don't even know. Like, we just have so many. And I'm like, well, how long have some of them gone? And he said, oh, over a year. So it's like at some point you need to know to when to pull the plug and say, this just isn't it, right? This isn't, we're wasting our time here. But kind of the formula that we like to use here is, the measurement of ROI, right? Because at some point we have to quantify, and again, I'm going to show a chart a little bit later that kind of shows this visually a little bit better, kind of the thought process that we put together on this. But the idea is that, you know, you got to figure out what's the potential ROI of this. And if I have no way to measure what that ROI is, I shouldn't even be doing this, right? Is this something that's going to save, 16 hours a week for, two people? I need to understand that, right? Because are we going to invest the time in this? And then let's say we do kind of get to that end point of it and say, yes, this was a success. However, to build some custom agent or something is going to cost way more than the salary of those two people in the course of years, let's just say. So to us, if you don't have the ROI, then to pull the plug and say it's just not worth it, right? Yes, we feasibly can do it, but it's not worth it from a dollars perspective. No use case. This I hear a lot. Like, we're testing out said LLM, right? Okay, well, what are you testing with it? And blank stare. Like, what do you mean? What am I testing? Like, what are you testing with it? Is it like creating presentations? Is it doing some stuff with email? Is it creating code? Like, what is the point of you testing this? And they're like, kind of like, well, we just want to see if there's something else out there. You got to have your use cases of why you're going to pilot a certain thing, right? And this also goes back to kind of understanding what you have or what you're paying for currently. No outcome or goal of the AI usage, right? That kind of goes part of that, no use case, right? That how do you end that pilot? How do you end that to say that, if there's no end goal or anything like that, you're just going to keep doing a pilot for a year, right? And then not only is that resources from a user, right, or users who are putting time into feed this LLM, train it, build an agent, whatever they're doing with it, but also just the cost of it, right? If you have 5 people working on it, that's let's just say that they're working on it a couple hours a week, right? That's 5 times a couple hours a week for, again, in this case, it was a year, right? So not 52 weeks because you have time off, but let's just say 50 weeks, right, of those people doing that, but also the cost of that, 5 licenses for this. So it all begins adding up very, very quickly, right? When you're kind of going down this this endless path of ROI or of pilots, right? No test plan in place. What are you testing it for? And this is generally what I tell a lot of folks to even start with is a test plan of how do you measure this is a success or it is not a success of the pilot that we're going down, right? You have to have that test plan. Also, it's going to, hopefully your test plan is kind of mapping back to what the fix is going to be, right? So is it doing that thing? Because again, you need to understand, am I going to pull the plug on this? And I would put dates, right? I would say like maybe 30, 60 days or, kind of maximum 90 days if it's very complex. That's it. Like this is the window we are giving this pilot. And if we can't do the things that are in this time frame, then it's probably not worth going after, right? And then kind of the last one is just a lack of AI knowledge, right? So we're going to talk about AI literacy a little bit because that's a very important topic. But lack of AI knowledge, and again, sometimes these these are greenlit in IT, and IT doesn't even really fully understand what's going on with AI or how it works. So kind of driving the ship without really understanding how to drive is part of the problem with this, right? So getting some AI knowledge to understand how to get these use cases, get the outcomes, get the test plan, get the ROI, get all those things, and understand that from kind of an AI perspective is crucial to this because again we see these kind of time and time again fall in kind of that repeat pattern. So where does the value lie? I can't answer that for you, right? That is definitely up to you. I will say lots of customers are different, but I would say almost say different industries are different, right? Depending on what kind of business you're in. We've pretty much crossed the spectrum of businesses from retail to higher education to K through 12 to financial banking. You kind of name it, entertainment. We're there, and everybody's got something slightly different of what's the most value. Now, what we see for, I would say, across the board, that is generally is kind of your office, right? Your kind of back office slash maybe front office, right? That user productivity, you know, those types of things. Everybody's going to have a different kind of piece on this quadrant, whether it's whatever industry you're in, but even what department you're in, right? An example of that would be, executives are not going to be getting anything out of, they're not going to be creating PowerPoint presentations most likely, right? They got someone to do that for them. So that's not really a mark we would go after. However, sorting, emails by customer, getting long threads, getting summarization, getting email messages jump started, those types of things, getting insights into data. Those are things executives do, right? But maybe, front office or back office, they make so many PowerPoint presentations for them as kind of their use case, their go-to for it. So again, everybody's going to kind of fall into a different category by not only industry, but also what department or what role they have in the organization. So and this is why also when you're looking at kind of piloting or doing kind of an initial AI project, is that you have a swath of different users in there, from HR to finance and leadership roles and front end roles and those types of things, because you're really going to get a massive kind of sea of data, right, of use cases that you'll be able to get that you normally wouldn't get if you were just kind of siloing it to either just executives or just IT or just HR. You're going to kind of get it through one lens if you do that. So we have massive amounts of ROI and massive amounts of use cases once we've kind of opened this up to a broader audience of different levels. So again, the value will lie depending on what you're going after. Again, what kind of the point of it is. Again, we've had some customers that say, nope, the executives are kind of where we're going after because of essentially the high dollar amount, right, of that if we can shave off an hour here, an hour there, that is a huge amount of savings, right? Plus they're happy and all that fun stuff. But others are on the other spectrum where it's like, no, we want kind of the back office to be able to basically do more with less, if you will. And then even some of them are customer facing, right, where we have it like almost a strategy perspective of sales that know that if we made said agent and we could put it on our site at nighttime when there are no agents up, but can instead of being just a dumb chatbot, actually has some things going for it to where it can book meetings and things like that with folks that are in the office, based off of customers interacting with it. I mean, those are huge, right? And depending on what industry you're in, it could be a lot. Okay, so AI agents, AI literacy. So this is one I always love to talk about with this, because we always have kind of what I would say is a mix, right? So I generally have a customer that will say to me, like, oh, we're going to go after, AI, right? I'm new to AI. I don't know anything about AI. We're us as an organization. We want to do it. And they'll come to me and they'll say, I want an agent built though. And then the first question I say is, what's the AI literacy of your whole organization? And not always, but the majority of the time, they say none. We don't have any. We're not even doing any AI yet. And then I'll start like asking questions like, well, how many users do you have? And things like, well, this one particular agent, like how many people does it touch? What are you looking to save in time, right? And what we generally see, not always, right, but most than not, is that going down the AI literacy route is more beneficial than the single agent to start things off. And this is for a couple reasons. One, even if you let's use the 5-minute rule as I like to give the example to. For me, AI can save me 5 minutes on 20 meetings I have a week, let's say, right? That it saves me each week. I have 20 meetings. Now that I have AI, it saves 5 minutes from each of those 20 meetings to, you know, do something else, right? Or whatever. So over the course of a year, that's going to be like a little over 17.3, 17.6 hours, right? Not a lot, right? But it's one task that saves me 5 minutes. There's many other tasks out there. Now, if I take that, this is just me, but I have 100 other users or 100 other coworkers that do the same thing I do. Well, now that 5 minutes over 20 over the course of a year times 100 users is now 1,700 hours. Well, that's a big savings, right? And that's one thing. And I promise you, there's dozens of things AI is going to do for you that's going to do that. Some are 5 minutes, some are an hour, right? It's going to be all over the place. But to me, you get your bigger bang for that buck for that, because what I see with the agent route, or kind of the we're going to do this one thing to start off, is that typically just touches like 2 people, right? And maybe it saves them 8 hours, over the course of a month or something like that, or even a week. You're only looking at 16 hours of savings a week. And again, I know that that's a lot, but it's not going to compare to the 100 users that just say 5 minutes. And like I said, I would argue that it goes even further than that, that you will get down to many, many hours, a day or a week around that. So times that times hundreds of users. So it all adds up. I generally always, recommend where possible that you go down kind of the AI literacy route for the organization, because one more thing about that is that when you don't know AI, you think very differently, right? And again, let's kind of go back to the old internet days of search, right? When the search engines were fairly new, like literally, I remember seeing people had on their resume, like, or as a skill, like they could Google things, like that was a skill, right? Now, like everybody just searches, right? So, but you had to think differently, right? From how you had searched before anything else to Google things, right? You had to think a different way, and you had to search a different way using certain types of keywords, right? This is no different. So my point being this is, once they've learned to prompt, once they learn to understand that piece, and again, that's a huge piece of this, is they have to learn to prompt, right, on this stuff. This is a totally different mindset. And again, I think AI is very easy, and I think anybody can learn it, but you have to just have that aha moment, right, to say, okay, I get it, the prompting now, and a good prompt is in there. So that is always when we see kind of the folks have the aha moment. But once they understand that, now they think of how to do things very differently in their day-to-day. So my point of this is, now going back to that agent, we have seen this time and time again where, customer says, I want an agent. We try and push them towards AI literacy. They're like, no, I really want this. We're like, okay, we'll do this. So then we do the agent. Then they come back and they say, well, that was great. Now let's do AI literacy for the rest of the company. So we do this. Then now what the users understand AI, they look at that agent and say, I would never have done it that way, because I wasn't thinking in the sense of AI when I wanted this, or how I wanted this to. Now I interact with AI very, very differently than I, interacted with the previous process that we had. So just keep that in mind, that, I'm not saying it's a throwaway or it's a waste if you go down the agent route first, but just know that you will get a much bigger bang for your buck, and you might it might be throwaway. Again, not always. We've had several that were like, no, it still lasted. But again, the users will think of things very differently once they learn AI. So kind of just still, going on this use case and, whatnot kind of journey is, as I like to say, cut through the noise. Start with the problem, not the solution. Again, I hear it time and time again. I hear we're going to get said model. I hear that a lot, right? I hear we got ChatGPT. Like, that's very cool. Why did you get ChatGPT? They said, well, we saw this. They were doing like some YouTube thing. They were having like a meeting, like they were showing like releasing something, and they were like making these videos from just text. I'm like, that is pretty cool. They are pretty real looking. I'm like, do you guys make videos like that? And they're like, no, not at all. I'm like, well, why was that the selling point then? Right. And there's no answer to that. It's buzz, it's excitement. It's it's kind of the word to use. So people will just go grab it without really understanding, is this model what I'm going to fix, what I need fixing, right? Again, kind of going back to the, it's a tool, right? It's not your strategy. It's your tool to help execute that strategy. You need to make sure that LLM aligns with your strategy. Of what you're trying to do. So again, here, want to identify the pain points, right? Whether it's in customer, experience or operations, in here. And again, we got to have data to figure this stuff out, right? We got to figure out what's the use cases around these. What's it got, when we implement it is what's the the accuracy of it, the security. Again, this goes all back to the stuff we talked about. Any policy, right? Resource availability, those types of things. Are we connected to the right systems? Do these systems even connect to our LLMs? Can they? Right? These are all things we would need to understand and figure that piece out. And then again, we have to have quantifiable ROI, right? And also the scale of the impact. I talked about this a little bit earlier, right? If we don't know the ROI or we don't know the use case and we're just doing this thing for a year, like we need to know what the scale of this is going to be. Is this going to save me 5 minutes, but it's going to take me hundreds of thousands of dollars to write? It's probably not worth it, right? Over the course of the time. So understanding that, and as we like to say, the time to value with that. And then again, what's the strategic importance? Are we just doing it because it's just really cool? And again, there's nothing wrong with cool, but in today's economy, in today's world, people really just aren't looking for the cool thing. They're looking for the efficient thing or the thing that's going to cut down time or do something way better, right? So understand what that strategic importance is to you of going down this path. And then again, prioritize it, right? Technical feasibility. We have a lot of times where folks are just like, we just don't have the talent in-house to do it, right? Or we don't have the talent after you're gone, right? So there's options for that here at Netrix. We can I'll talk about them towards the end, but there's all those things that are in there. Again, complexities, resource requirements, resource availability, all of these fun things, all of this stuff comes in here. But what we recommend is that you start with the problem, not the solution. Figure out what it is that needs to be fixing or that you're trying to solve here, and then we work kind of backwards from that. So this is kind of the graph I told you about that we would get into. But what this is kind of I would say our flow, right, of this, of what we like to do, how we like to, kind of the approach we like to recommend customers get into, right? Where, again, we kind of start off on the top right up there where we have kind of our use case discovery, prioritization on it, finalize the business plans, success criteria, right? We have to have that. It's kind of our test plan, right? When do we say this was successful, or where we need to kind of pull the plug? Then we look at the models, right? What models do we need if we don't have it? What framework, right? What data foundation do we need to change some things? We need to hook up Salesforce to it, right? Those sorts of things. We need to figure that out. Security and compliance and legal considerations. Again, these should be kind of part of your policies, right, within the organization to understand what that is, but also have kind of a board that kind of looks at these things too, right? That kind of green lights or red lights or whatever, that kind of knows that those types of things are going on. And then again, responsible AI considerations. There's plenty of times that there's like this really new cool thing out there. But maybe there's not a lot of thing in the contract that says like maybe they're not going to train, maybe they will train, maybe they won't train. I don't know. It's kind of vague in their wording with my data. So making sure that this will fall into that category, right? That if you as an organization have established that we have to have responsible AI that won't train on our data, et cetera, and this really cool thing doesn't, well, now we're back at zero, right? No, we got something else. We can't do this. We can't go down this path. Kind of almost at any point in this time do you kind of cut back when it can't hit that next piece. And then from there, we once we have all that together, then we go to what we call, the proof of value or the decision point, right? Which is going to say all the things we talked about, the use cases, the test plan to get it. What is our success criteria? How long do we think this is going to take to build? All those things, so we can sit there and say yes or no at this point, right? So once we do say yes, then we kind of traverse throughout the rest of it, right? Where we build it out, we evaluate it, we test it, right? We deploy it, it's scale, it's got to be maintained. Again, don't think that when we're talking especially like agents that it's kind of a one and done. You will have to go back to the agent and look at it and see how people are interacting with it. Excuse me. And you might have to tweak some things, right? You might find that people are abandoning it after they ask a certain question, and you'll try and trace why that is. Well, maybe it's like an HR bot and, they're asking about what they feel is HR things, and let's just say it's on policies, right? That you made kind of an agent around policies, but you're finding that people are asking about benefits and stuff like that. So that's kind of a decision point to you, right? That you could say, well, I can add, benefit information to this, or I can create another one, or right, like, you have some decisions to think about right there. But that data is going to be important. It's going to help you. You got to keep going back and looking at kind of how people are using it and tweaking that ever so often with that, or new data or new models. Again, every model is going to be a little bit different in agent, not to go down an agent route here. But then again, then you have the business value of what that is. And again, you just keep rinsing and repeating this every time you're trying to go down this path, whether it's a pilot or you're, looking at doing a different LLM or whatever. But this is kind of the formula that we have found success with our customers to walk them through this. So AI changes. AI changes a lot, and you're going to want to make sure that your policy and your training are keeping up with that. And what do I mean by this? So, to me, AI has what I call a 3-month cycle and a 6-month super cycle. And what I mean, and this is all of them, whether it's Copilot, Google Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, ChatGPT, it doesn't matter. They all go through this, where every 3 months they get like a bunch of little new features, and then every 6 months it has such new capabilities and features that it's almost like a new product every time. And like I said, they all go through this, right? So that's why having a policy that's flexible is important, because these things are going to drastically change. Plus, there's also laws out there that just haven't been written around AI yet, because it's all still very new. This reminds me a lot of, like 11 years ago or 12 years ago when the cloud was new, right? Like there was like nothing around the cloud, right? And then now, we got GDPR and all this other stuff, right? So this same thing is going to happen, right? I promise you that. So my point with this is being flexible with your policies within the organization, storage, all that type of fun things, because this is absolutely going to, play a role in 6 months, a year, or 2 years, whatever it is, once kind of, governments catch up to kind of the legalese of this, if you will. But also, this is why training is important. Again, I've said it many times, I'll continue to say it, that training is paramount. That even with that kind of campaign and email and training that you initially do, training in AI is very different from other things, right? Let's just talk about like SharePoint. So SharePoint back in on-premise days, like if we had like 2010, like we would like, train up the organization on 2010, and we literally didn't have to do any training for about 4 years. And that's if we went to the new version, right? That's if we went to the next version of SharePoint. And most companies didn't. They would do like an every other, right? So they would keep 2010, bypass 2013, and then they would jump on 2016. Well, that's a long time, right? To where I don't have to train anybody on anything, AI is different. It changes all the time. There's always new capabilities. And again, if you're always keeping track of your use cases, you will know that maybe there was this use case, right? That someone in finance or HR or whatever came out with, and maybe it didn't do it today, right? Like the model doesn't do that today. It doesn't work that way. But it's great to document those things, because when one of those super cycles comes around and it does do that feature or functionality, well, now I can go back to that person in HR or finance and say, hey, remember when you asked me like 3 or 4 months ago about this? Well, let me show it to you, because here it is. Because again, you're paying for this, right? You're paying for these models. You want to use as much as you can out of them, all of the stuff that you can out of them, right? And if you have users who don't know their capabilities of the things that it can do, well, that's a problem, right? Because they're never going to keep up with it, and you're not utilizing the maximization of your license, or whatever you're getting there, your kind of monthly subscription to these things. So that's key to that, is always keeping those things. Again, we'll talk about Champions program in a second, because that's super important too with this, because I don't expect everybody, like someone in HR, to keep up with all the LLM blogs and all that fun stuff. So it's super important though that we, it's changing all the time, that your policies are keeping up with it, and that your training is keeping up with all these new features and capabilities that are coming out. Because kind of go to that last example or earlier example of how the one customer was buying other LLMs because the users had no idea that it did these things, and some of it was new features that had come out in the past 3 months. They didn't know about it. So again, this could be costly if you're not training in the users. Phase roadmap. So this is, AI is not a thing you want to boil the ocean with, right? On day one. And again, I have some customers that are just like, nope, we're pedal to the metal. And a lot of others are, we're going to kind of ease into this, right? And I think that that's a great approach, right? Is, like I said, you're going to want to, start with that policy, right? Understand kind of the rules of engagement that you're going to allow. I would kind of go through an exercise to figure out what model you should start with, right? Within that, and then from there, training, departmental, kind of roll out in phases with this, and prompt training, and maybe a later phase you're going to integrate with some line of business applications. Maybe just to start, you're just going to let everybody just kind of use the native stuff, not integrated anything. You could be looking at MCP servers down the line and all that fun stuff. But it is a journey. It is something that isn't going to be done in a month, right? This is something that's going to take some time to go across. But I will say that once kind of everybody gets up and running and understands the prompt and is AI literate, then it is, once you onboard new things, that if you do decide to go and we'll say we're using Copilot, but our HR team uses like Harvey or something like that. Like that's a very easy transition, because again, your legal department already knows Copilot. They already know how to prompt all that stuff. So you're not always starting from zero. Once you get that AI literacy up in the organization, this stuff come very quickly then, right? Because all the training, all the kind of resources are there at your disposal. And it's kind of the foundation of everything. So how can we help, right? So these are some, not anywhere near all the things that we can do for you around AI. But these are kind of, our more popular ones, and I'll just kind of give a quick rundown of some of these. And so we have our AI Advisory Impact Workshop. So this is really getting down to that ROI and use case. What we do with this is we kind of demo the product, again, whether that is ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, whatever it is. We basically get what users want to understand out of it. We do a demo around that so they fully understand what it's doing and what it's doing for them specifically. And then we gather some use cases, and then we get the ROI attached to those, and then we kind of present that back. And again, it's very different. Every customer is very different of what that looks like, but some, it aligns with the goals, whether it's operational efficiencies or whatever it is, right? That will help guide that, and you'll have an itemized list that will tell you, these are the use cases, and we give our suggestion, right? Like these are like the top 5 things we think you should go after, like maybe training for this department, rolling out more licenses, this one, and building an agent, perhaps, right? Everybody's different. Data readiness assessment. So this is making sure that the data is, accessible and all those fun things, that if you want to, tap into some databases and things like that of sales data, that is readily available, and making sure that those things can happen. Then we have our Gen AI data security assessment. So it's security and governance. So we talked a lot about that a little in the beginning, where we want to make sure that, our data is secure. Also the exposure of that data, right? Like I said, it's not a big deal if you have sensitive info types in your environment, like social security numbers, as long as not everybody in the company has access to that, right? So it's understanding that, and that's what we look at. We look at stale data. We look at, okay, you do have sensitive info types, but what's the exposure of them, right? Are they being shared out with the whole company, or are they pretty locked down on a site? If they're pretty locked down on a site, then we're okay with that, right? And we kind of give that a green type of thing. So again, we can help customers through that. We have a whole company advisory services. So this is someone that kind of plugs themselves in, think of like a VCSO, but for AI, right? Where they help guide an organization down the path of AI, whatever that is, whether it's selecting models, regulatory things, helping with policies, all of that fun stuff, right? Kind of being that go-to person for an entire organization. User adoption, and that can be many things of prompting, right? Or it can be email campaigns that we help you with, the marketing campaigns of how to launch this, video training, where we can either do live training or recorded, or we do short vids, right? Cut sheets and things like that. And then even help you completely roll this out, right? That you want to roll out Copilot or Gemini to the whole organization. We help you with that all, every step of the way, all the way until the last person gets it, from, again, getting things secured to deployment, to the policies, to the training, all that fun stuff. And then building stuff, right? Once you're kind of got all of that and everybody's there, everybody's AI literate within the organization, then we can look at building things, right? Do we want agents? Do we want to connect and create MCP servers, right? So that you can get access to the data throughout. All those fun things. And then last but not least, but like I said, we have many more than this. These are just the top ones that would fit on the slide that were probably the most popular, but a champions program. And kind of, I talked about that a couple slides back of things are always changing and whatnot. While we would absolutely love that you call Netrix out every single month, right, to do training for that, I'm sure that's not reality for most companies. So what the Champions program is we help your AI champions, right, teach. Right. So we show them how we would teach. We show them what resources we get. We will do a lunch and learn while they shadow us, and then we will shadow them and then kind of critique and say, oh, would it, maybe we could change this or whatever. So this helps basically train the trainer, if you will, right? So we go in there, understand, we get some more use cases, all that fun stuff, and pick a place for this stuff to live. So it's another popular program along with kind of the Center of Excellence for AI. So again, lots of different things that are kind of at your disposal here at Netrix. And so we'll look for any questions. Let me check the chat. I'm sure there's something in there since we were all this time together. Let me go. Okay, here we go. We got a couple. All right. How do we determine which AI use cases should be prioritized for our 2026 roadmap? Good question. So I can't answer that fully. I would say it's depending on what you want, and what I mean by that is, if your goal was more operational efficiencies, then those would be the use cases we would tackle, right? We would identify those and see which ones had the ROI that would result in more operational efficiencies, and those would be the ones we should do most. Or maybe you got a bunch of unhappy users and you're like, they'd be really happy if we did this piece of it. That might be what it is, right? If employees hate doing this one thing like time entry or whatever, maybe there's the use case, right, that is going to make folks super happy that they don't have to do this thing anymore, that AI is going to assist with that. So it's really hard to say what it is. We work with you and determine those. Like I said, we come up with 5 that we recommend our next steps. And every customer is very different on what those 5 are, because not only from the use cases that are discovered, but where they as a company want to be, right, in 3 months, 6 months, whatever that thing is. So we kind of align those use cases to whatever they're looking for, and that's kind of my recommendation. Whatever your strategy is, right, of execution. Remember, AI is not the strategy; it's the tool to help you execute that. So whatever your strategy is for AI, for the company, for whatever that thing is, that's where we go after. That's what we'll attack with it. Another question. What organizational changes, skills, training, operating models do we need to implement to become truly AI ready by 2026? I'll go back to the power tool analogy, right? All the employees need to understand how to use it, be trained on power tools, and they will think of new ways to use them on the job site, right, when they understand it. So to me, that is getting prompting training, just general AI literacy. If you're going to go down the path and allow everybody to make agents or a subset of users to make agents, understanding that piece, because I promise you, they will think of things way differently than if they had not known anything about AI. It just truly makes you think differently as you kind of learn about these things, right, and the capabilities and the features. And then once you're exposed to some use cases, real world ones that you're doing, right, then you kind of have that aha moment, like, okay, I totally get what they're saying right now, or why I would want to do something like this a certain way. So it will definitely train you, teach you to do things very, very differently than you ever have. I would almost liken it to the spreadsheet, right? Like before spreadsheet even existed, right, there was a different way, but that's totally changed, like all sorts of things, right? Because there's just once you learn how to do that, you look at things totally different, right, on how to do things. So this is the same thing. I definitely say, getting the skills up in AI literacy, and then again, kind of focusing on what the end goal, or maybe not end goal, but the next future goal or major goal that the company wants to go down with. That was it for the questions. Okay, so again, contact us, right? If you want to reach out to me or another AI expert here, reach out to info@netrixglobal.com, and you can find us there, and we're happy to help. Without further ado, that's it. I appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you for spending it with me. Had a great time. Love talking about AI, and thanks everybody. Have a great day.